Tokenism is a concept that theorizes the inclusion of marginalized artists in the dominant canon in a way that highlights their differences rather than dismantling structural hierarchies. These individuals often face heightened visibility, isolation, stereotyping, othering, and limited advancement opportunities. And this is why I'm arguing against tokenism in the work of Njideka Akunyili Crosby today. Now, how might Njideka's work be tokenized, you wonder? Well, feminist theory has argued that there is a right male position accepted as natural, or a hidden he, that is the subject of all scholarly predicates. Despite feminist intervention, this default viewpoint of a white male continues to hold in the visual arts today, especially when the black body is the subject. Stuart Hall and Bell Hooks have argued exactly that when they speak of the construction of white representation of blackness in film being totalizing and harmful. This totalizing, harmful view informs attitudes towards black women artists and the art that they make, and often relegates them to token status. But before we jump in, we are at the Art History Symposium. So I'd like to invite you, as you look at the next few slides, to make a mental note of what you see. You are art historians after all. Don't use any lenses. Just make a mental note of what you look at and what you observe. So as an observer, I'll give you a few more seconds to think about, make those mental notes. What feelings were evoked by the work? Njideka Akunyili Crosby is a Nigerian-American artist that uses photographic transfer, acrylic, colored pencil, and fabric on paper to make these huge immersive pieces that, to me, feel like home. Now, Elspeth Van Breen and Natalie Zelton argued that Njideka tries to dismantle these systems of violence that I mentioned earlier. This piece, Portals, by Njideka Akunyili Crosby, was in the Whitney Biennial in 2016, and that is where Natalie Zelt saw it for the first time. After seeing this, Natalie Zelt penned a paper titled Picturing an Impossible American, in which she expounded on the impossibilities created by Njideka Akunyili Crosby. One of these impossibilities is what you see here, a Los Angeles night sky with a cassava plant, which is a literal impossibility because cassava plants grow in Nigeria, which is the native homeland of Njideka Akunyili Crosby, who is pictured here. Another impossibility is this over here. She uses collage in a way that is creating an impossible world. There are some things that are legible, there's some things that are illegible, with distance from the viewer or just the covered upness with other objects in the painting. Now, collage is obviously an important part of Njideka Akunyili Crosby's work. After seeing this, Natalie Zelt mentioned that Njideka Akunyili Crosby was contesting the idea of an assimilationist America in 2016. Because the idea of assimilationism in America would flatten the dimensions of the one Nigerian artist and would cause her to leave everything else that is true to her as an artist to become a one-dimensional being. And this is what Njideka Akunyili Crosby is rejecting, according to Natalie Zelt. As I mentioned, collage is really important, and you can see it in all of the aspects of her work. Elspeth Van Breen saw this work, and she argued that there is a creation of these contact zones. There are things that we know, and there are things that we don't know that are presented to us by the artist. This kind of presentation creates a wondering and wandering through art. We see something we know, and we lean in, and then we're offered something we don't know that drives us to question our own positionality, which is something the artist herself wants you to do. She opposes the one-dimensional view of the hegemonic structure by expressing a transnational identity using the techniques mentioned. She avoids being grounded in one place, existing as an American who holds multiple truths. Elspeth Van Bereen also argued that the inclusion of all of these contact zones and collage create a queer epistemology in our viewing, because collage has a power that is twofold. The first power of collage in the works of Njideka Akunyili Crosby is to disrupt our visual language, which it does very well here, as you can see. Collage breaks existing structural order by snatching pieces together and bringing them together, which is how they open up a world of possibilities. The second power of collage in these works is a rejection of the dominant narrative, which says collage is low art or lesser art, which is something you might have heard as art historians yet again. And this is a rejection because pieces like this end up in the Whitney Museum, and that means that collage is not a lesser art. Is that right? So, Natalie Zelt mentioned there's impossible worlds that Njideka Akunyili Crosby creates. Elspeth Van Bereen speaks of the queering that exists of Njideka's work. Zelt again argues a contestation of assimilationist views of what it means to be American. And Elspeth Van Bereen speaks of the wondering and the wondering through the work that creates curiosity that is important for feminist and decolonial curiosities. Both of them are focused on the dismantling of systemic violence that Njideka Akunyili Crosby's work does. But there is a hidden something that is not quite being mentioned in all of these critiques. I'll give you a second to think about what that could be. They're both centering the existing view that the artist is trying to break away from. Natalie Zelt mentions she's contesting assimilationist views, which is again centering and putting the hegemonic dominance back on the assimilationist views. And Elspeth Van Bereen speaks of the queering, but what is being queered is the dominant narrative, which is again being given hegemonic dominance. As you can see, even in the way they speak about collage as a lesser art form is from these dominant structural views. Which leads us to a tokenistic view of our work. And I think Njideka's work is more important than just that. So how many of you thought of these words when you looked at the pieces that I showed you earlier? No hands. My point exactly. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house is an essay by Audre Lorde in which she talks about our use of the master's tools to try and dismantle the systems that we are in. Both these critics are centering this Western view, and this analysis begins to become problematic. Interpretation here is a tool by the system to make art digestible and consumable, and it begins to water down the power of it, or at least cushion the power. Njideka Akunyili Crosby herself once said, every once in a while you come across work you just understand without having to read anything about it. I had that for Nkechi's art. I was like, I don't need to read any wall text. I know this work in my bones. And I wanted to make work that would evoke similar feelings in people. This sounds similar to a sentiment shared by another art critic, which maybe I'll give you a second to think about what that could be. Anti-interpretation. Susan Sontag argued that instead of hermeneutics of art, we need an erotics of art. She argued that intellectualizing art after we witness it leads us to not really feel the feelings associated with the art itself. In 2021, I did an exhibition in which I showed this piece, Amai Ndimana. A woman walked into the exhibition and broke down crying looking at the piece. She could barely tell you why she was crying, and I could barely tell you why she was crying. But she allowed the art to evoke feelings inside of her that she was able to express, instead of intellectually reaching for the words to find out how she can intellectualize it. So, I invite us all to maybe rethink critique. The way we critique art, especially that tries to break away from dominant systemic structures, when it centers these structures, then we're relying on the same dominant structures to critique the work, which puts us in a loop where we're not really stepping away from anything, but we're giving the hegemonic dominance back to the things that we want to step away from. I also invite us to maybe be expansive when we critique work. If, when we look at Njideka Akunyili Crosby's work, we didn't think of tokenizing her and thinking of the highlighting of her individual heritage, but instead maybe thought of our own multiplicitousness. Everybody in the room has a history that is multiplicitous, I would argue. And what would it look like if we instead reached for this, rather than tokenizing and highlighting Njideka Akunyili Crosby's work itself? So, as you look at Njideka Akunyili Crosby's work one more time, I invite you that rather than interpreting Akunyili Crosby's work through Western frameworks that position it as exceptional or oppositional, we must allow it to exist beyond these structures. We must allow it to be experienced sensorially, rather than constantly explained. And only then can her work move beyond token inclusion towards the genuine transformation. Thank you.